Welcome back to my Supernatural Life Network. This next story comes to us from Isabel of Southern California, talking about her father's near encounter with Duendes in the Sonoran desert. Hopefully you find this story intriguing and will stick around for future episodes on this channel. I always knew my father to be such a realist, such a practical man. He was skeptical of religion, superstition, and even everyday stories he heard from those around him. This is what makes the following story so astonishing. During the 1930s and early 40s, he was a young struggling musician in a band playing gigs all over the desert state of Sonora in the northwest part of Mexico. Because money was scarce, some of the band's members would live together while others still lived at home with their parents. My father stayed with one of his bandmates, Felipe, just the two of them, in a small dwelling made of adobe bricks with very humble furnishings. They had an old wood-burning stove which helped to keep the place warm at night. Desert nights can get very cold. Each night they would cook their dinner, then leave the stove burning so that they could be enveloped in the warmth radiating through their small abode as they fell asleep in the bedroom. On one of those nights, just before dawn, my father was awakened by light clinking and the noise of small movements coming from the kitchen area. He immediately thought it might be a mouse or other rodent, so he rose quickly from his bed. Just as he was doing so, he heard the noises from the kitchen become hurried and clumsy. Something spilled, and a pitter-patter of small, tiny footsteps scurried away just as he poked his head into the kitchen. What he found were the ashes from the stove spilled across the concrete kitchen floor. Slightly annoyed at this rodent, he went for a lamp and a broom to clean up the mess. Just as he was about to start sweeping, he noticed small footprints in the ash. These footprints were not what he was expecting, though. They weren't rodent-like. They were very human-looking, but much smaller, as if someone had taken a doll and made imprints in the ash with its feet. Thinking that his mind might be playing tricks on him, he went to get his roommate to see what he would make of it. Felipe quickly recognized the phenomenon and said, "Don't worry, don't be afraid. Those prints are from duendes." For anyone who may not know, duendes are very much like what we in English would call gnomes. In folklore, they are little tricksters that guard treasure. For the most part they are harmless, but they can be malicious. At that moment, my father remembered that lately it had been hard finding their shoes in the morning. He would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with his blanket on the floor on the other side of the room, and things were just out of place sometimes. Felipe continued, "I hadn't told you about this because I didn't think you would believe me, but a few days ago, while you were out getting groceries, I had some papers for our next gig on the table. I left my cigarette case on top of them to pin them down. I went into the bedroom to change, and by the time I came out, some of the papers were scattered under the table, but my cigarette case was just where I had left it." My father was still a little skeptical despite the evidences because their dwelling was very little, free of clutter, and didn't have any places for these things to hide. His roommate then explained that duendes are believed to live inside the walls or underground. The adobe bricks on their walls did have lots of little crevices, nooks, and small holes all over. The walls were thick too, thicker than what our more modern walls are like. This led to the following logical suggestion from my father. "Well," he said, "if they live inside the walls, would you be up for digging out the wall and see what we can find?" Felipe considered for a minute and said, "Yeah, I'd be up for it. I'm curious to find out what is here." They had gigs coming up that night and for the rest of the weekend, as musicians frequently do. They agreed to gather some tools over the next few days and prepare for the lull in their work at the beginning of the following week. When the time finally came, they decided to wait until nighttime so that they wouldn't be disturbed. They analyzed their home for what would be a good spot to likely find something and got to work. They had somewhat of a bad feeling and were a little nervous for what they could find, but they continued. With considerable effort, they removed some of the big adobe bricks from the bottom of one of the walls in the kitchen. Once there, they noticed that some of the dirt beneath was very loose compared to some of the other dirt, which prompted them to dig. They didn't get very deep before they found something, what looked like a small toy knife stuck in the dirt. They dug it out carefully and examined it. This was no toy. The blade was steel and sharp enough for some test cuts they did. No toy maker would make such a thing. That gut feeling they had had earlier suddenly worsened. They just looked at each other. My father was the first to speak. "I don't know what is here. I don't know what awaits us if we keep looking. There could be buried gold for all I know, but to be honest, at this point, I would rather leave it alone. I would rather not disturb whatever this is." Felipe simply nodded in agreement. Without saying another word, they returned the little knife and got to work on returning everything to how it was. Many years have passed before my father would tell us that story. The little home he once shared with his bandmate was eventually demolished to expand some local business. It was a big commotion in the local news when they uncovered an old wood box with gold coins in it. The owner of that business literally struck gold, but his happy story quickly turned dark when he mysteriously disappeared one day, leaving his wife and 2 children. It still gives me chills to know that my father could have been rich, but at what cost? Well everyone, there you have it. Leave us a like if you found this story interesting, and please subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you liked or didn't like, and let us know how we can improve. We'd love to hear your stories if you got them. Please take a look at the description to submit a story and have us read it. We promise we'll do our best to do it justice. Until next time, keep an open eye.